Hello everyone, it's Vivi and welcome. First things first, Jak Daxter has turned 20. The Precursor Legacy launched in North America on December 3rd, 2001 on the PlayStation 2. So what happened, you might ask? Any acknowledgement from the publisher or developer? Well, a couple of things. Sony acknowledged its anniversary by sharing a blog post. This blog featured PlayStation Studios and third-party teams sharing their fond memories of this series. Naughty Dog also went on to share an old 2001 teaser of the Precursor Legacy and retweeted that same PlayStation blog. They wished the series a happy 20th anniversary and thanked fans for their love and support. Neil Druckmann also shared this. Other than that, PlayStation also shared a clip of someone popping in their PlayStation 2 disc. Josh Mansell, composer of the series, was also interviewed, with one of his quotes being, "Jak's graphics are beautifully detailed, and the non-linear type gameplay immerses the player in expansive environments. I used this visual information to offer up musical inspiration for the Jak soundtracks." One bonus thing I'd like to add. This video was originally planned for #JakMonth. For those not too familiar with this hashtag, it was for a month-long, fan-driven community event in celebration of Jak Daxter's 20th anniversary. The event ended on December 3rd. With that said, let's first go over the preliminaries of our fuzzy little orange ottsel, or our little orange lightning.
I'm the real hero here. You can call me Orange Lightning.
Daxter's story, or rather, his first appearance happened in the Precursor Legacy released in 2001. Daxter starts off as a human, they sneak into Misty Island and Daxter falls in Dark Eco. He turns into an ottsel. Samos explained that one way to turn him back would be to talk to Gal Ekaran, someone who studied Dark Eco. Throughout our adventures, Daxter acts as our cheeky little friend sitting on our shoulder. The wisecracker that he is, makes cheeky remarks absolutely wherever possible.
Don't worry, I'll avenge you! What?
We later come to realize that Dark Eco went to Gal and Maya being his sister, to both their heads, trying to take over the world by exposing it to Dark Eco. They went as far as kidnapping all other sages in order to power an ancient precursor robot. As Light Eco comes to play, from combination of all Eco, Daxter believes that's what's needed to revert him back to human form. He realizes that the right course of action is to use Light Eco to defeat Gal and Maya, or in other words, to save the world instead.
Okay, fine. We'll save the world, but do it quickly before I change my mind!
Next, Jak 2 released in 2003. Daxter travels to the future with us. Well, they felt like they had no choice. A big monster appears through a rift, who we later find out to be the man behind the mask, and a creature, a leader of the ones known as the Metalheads. Or, if we go back to like the ancient history, the Horicon, if we take into account the ancient war between them and the Precursors. Now, chronologically speaking, Daxter does play a significant role right at the start of Jak 2. Jak is taken, gets put under the Dark Warrior program for 2 years. And what was Daxter up to exactly? Well, we'll get to that very shortly. Let us first focus on the order of release. In terms of actual events in Jak 2, after Jak's rescue, they both stumble on a kid and an old man. They fend off the guards. The old man, who's named Core, mentions the Underground, the rebel group trying to dethrone the Baron. This would be when Daxter first stumbles on Tess. They don't really interact in this scene, but technically that's when Tess appears on screen for the first time. His future love interest, in other words. Daxter was actually playable a couple of times. First was inside the Tomb of Mar when being chased by that Widowmaker. Second would be Class 2 race when Jak and Kira got a bit into an argument. You could also play a Metalhead Mash minigame at the Hip Hog Heaven Saloon. By beating this minigame, we'd unlock the time map, which was hidden inside the machine by Crew. We entrusted Tess to send that artifact to Kira. This was used to power up the Rift Rider, which allowed young Samos and young Jak to travel back in time to Sandover. Jak 3, released in 2004. After Haven City's attack by the Metalheads, the Council blamed Jak and it was decided that Jak be banished to the Wastelands. Daxter refused to leave his friend behind. Pecker was also with us. He tried protesting about the whole thing, so him along with Daxter joined Jak. They're all eventually found passed out, they're taken to Spargus City. Our duo is put through some trials in order to prove their worthiness, worthy enough not to be banished from Spargus. Pecker winds up becoming Damus's advisor. Damus was also originally banished to the Wastelands by the Baron long ago. Not only did he turn out to be the king of Spargus, but also Jak's father. Speaking of Pecker, he still played the role of relaying information to Jak and Daxter from Onin, and that later allowed Jak and Daxter to locate the Precursor core. The core, as the name suggests, is the core of the planet. The place where our gang discovered the truth about the Precursor's identity. Ottsels, a twist, call it.
Oh my god.
The Precursors later explained that Daxter was blessed into becoming an ottsel, a precursor. During the ending, Daxter wished he had pants just like them, and voila. For some reason, the pants are green in the back cover of the official strategy guide for Jak 3. So where were we? Yes, Tess. Tess, here, it's shown that they pretty much have an established attraction for one another. She also turns into an ottsel. The Precursor's reasoning for that, be careful what you wish for. Tess wished she had a pair of pants just like that, and she got her wish, and more. We'll dive more into how Tess and Daxter slowly became fond of one another very soon. The Precursors wish to show Jak the universe. Jak comes back right after, explaining that with all their adventures ahead, he couldn't leave Dax behind. This moment right here perhaps made you wonder what the Precursors actually meant by universe. You probably asked yourself, did Jak go on a journey through time? Only to realize or be shown that he does indeed have more adventures ahead? In other words, did he simply travel back to this exact time and location, making it seem like a short trip? And who can forget the whole Mar thing? Let's just leave it at that. In terms of playability when it comes to Daxter, he helped us in our mission to coral some wild leaper lizards. We also had the Great Volcano, pushing down a pillar helping Jak traverse the area. We had a mission in port, handling a missile turret, deactivating a Crimson Guard barrier, the Eco Grid, collecting codes necessary to deactivate the grid, the Crimson Guard War Factory, activating and deactivating barrier devices. Just like in Jak 2, Daxter would hold onto the morph gun when riding a zoomer. Then we move on to Jak X Combat Racing, released in 2005, 1 year after the events of Jak 3, at least according to character statistics. Jak was 19 in this game, whereas he was 18 in Jak 3. Our gang traveled to Kras City, attending Crew's last will. They were all invited by Crew's daughter Rain, which I did make a video on the past. The gang was poisoned by the wine. Only way to get the antidote was to compete in the Kras City Grand Championship. We later come to realize that Rain was in on the whole thing, leaving her father's journal at the bar for the gang to stumble on it. As for Pecker, he didn't really join the gang. Rather, he becomes a co-star on GT Blitz's show and co-commentator. His secret assignment was to uncover the illegal activities surrounding this sport. So he ultimately relayed info to the gang, and wanted to expose Blitz, aka Crime Lord, Mizo, on live TV. As for Tess, she was shown in the last scene where these two were being all lovey-dovey at the Naughty Ottsel, formerly known as the Hip Hog Saloon owned by Crew. Daxter rebranded it at the end of Jak 2. Now playing this game for 5 hours would unlock Daxter as a playable character. One thing we all noticed, Daxter still wore his pants. This was made evident during the prologue at the Bloody Hook, when Daxter was sharing their early adventures in Kras City. Now continuing off the release order of games, we move on to Daxter, released in 2006 on the PSP, developed by Ready at Dawn. This game features Daxter front and center. The story takes place after Jak gets imprisoned by the guards. Daxter runs away in an attempt to try and rescue Jak. Almost 2 years later, the story begins with Daxter inside a bar, sharing his adventures with the people in his surrounding. He gets approached by Osmo, head of Critter Ritter, a metal bug extermination company. He was offered a job as an exterminator due to the potential Osmo saw in him. He seemed hesitant at first. His focus was to free his friend from prison, not to mention the implication of bravery required for this job and possible death. so naturally he'd be kinda hesitant here. So basically, throughout the story of Daxter, he completes a bunch of jobs, taking care of metal bugs. Eventually, he stumbles on Jak being taken away. He chases after the vehicle. Unfortunately, he gets interrupted by Crimson Guards. Simon, Osmo's son, was tasked by his father to look for Daxter as he hadn't heard from him for a while. While going through and planning such things, he was thwarting Kaiden's plans, the one responsible for these metal headbugs running around certain areas of Haven City, of course, under Core's command. Kaiden always tried to bring down Osmo's extermination business. He even went on to lengths to blow up the place, right after killing Tick. Tick is a termite Daxter befriended after wishing he had his own sidekick. Tick helped Daxter locate Jak's coordinates by technically having Count Vigor freak out over a bug and the map falling right into Daxter's hands. Tick also helped find new clothes for Jak, and Jak's eventually rescued. Right after defeating Kaiden, his last words were, "My master will be waiting for you and Jak outside. It's already written, the city will be ours." So it seems Jak and Daxter stumbling on Core and the little kid wasn't a coincidence after all. Last scene we have Daxter and crew at the Naughty Ottsel. We'd like to believe Daxter was sharing his story, his quest dealing with bugs and eventually rescuing Jak. We'd like to believe that this scene in particular happens between the ending of Jak 2 and the start of Jak 3, due to a few simple factors. Tess here already shows the closeness she's gotten with Daxter, an already established connection. After all, we did first meet Tess right at the start of Jak 2, remember? Another one would be Jak wearing his Jak 2 attire, of course. Daxter's portrait up on the wall indicating that this is a Naughty Ottsel, which if you remember, first belonged to crew as the Hip Hog Heaven Saloon. Daxter rebranded it at the end of Jak 2. An extra one, Kira and Jak. This could have been the start of these two actually getting closer. In Jak 3, it was never made clear if Kira and Jak were dating or in a relationship. Instead, we had what seemed to be like a temporary fling between him and Ashlyn. Fun fact, in Jak 3's debug, you can actually see these two kissing. In the game, it wasn't shown but implied. As for the woman right there winking at Daxter, that's Taryn, someone who gave Daxter missions and equipment upgrades. She wasn't very sure of Daxter at first, she was very dismissive, but later she grew fond of him and saw him as a valuable asset to the team. Another interesting fact, Taryn is an unlockable playable character in Jak X Combat Racing if you connect your PSP to your PS2 with save data of Daxter. As for the PlayStation 4 emulated port of Jak X, you can unlock her by having a save file of the Nathan Drake collection. Taryn was originally going to be named Rain with an E. Alright, again, focusing on the order of release, we move on to The Lost Frontier. Released in 2009 on the PSP and PlayStation 2, developed by High Impact Games. Dax still got his pants, but just something I want to point out. The idea of this game, the world was running out of its life source, Eco. The gang visit Brink Island, trying to find a new eco source. The role Daxter played in this story, he pretty much just acted as our usual sidekick buddy, hanging on our shoulder. He did at a point fall down the sewers and come into contact with a shower of dark eco. He turns into a mutant creature, Dark Daxter. He's playable here, he reverts back at will, and Jak doesn't say anything. So at first, Daxter was blessed with Dark Eco, but then cursed, looking at The Lost Frontier. If we do try to explain this, Daxter was lucky at first, blessed to turn into an ottsel, but once he gets into contact with more Dark Eco, that's when it really starts to affect him negatively. Sort of speak. He turns into a mutant monster, after all. Speaking of The Lost Frontier, this is a bit off topic, but since I'm bringing up this game, there's a few facts I want to bring up. Back in 2013, IGN published a massive History of Naughty Dog article. According to the team, they originally started working on The Lost Frontier for PSP. What happened? Well, it was too much for the team. They were working on both Uncharted PlayStation 3 and The Lost Frontier PSP. It was just too much for them. A couple of quotes worth bringing up. What happened with the PSP game is that we realized Uncharted would never happen if we still had people working on the PSP game. I'm sure there were some other decisions too, like questioning whether the effort of making the PSP game would be financially worth it to the company and all that sort of thing. I wasn't privy to those decisions. Stated by Josh Scher. Kurosaki, former member at Naughty Dog, explained that the opening cinematic we have in the final game is basically shot for shot of what they had. They had worked on a lot of cinematics for this game. Eventually, the studio, the people working there had low morale. They were simply worried about the team's status. People were resigning. It was just becoming too much. We made the decision to cancel the PSP project because we were like, alright, we just have too much. Our focus is spread too thin. We need to lay the focus on the most important thing, which is going to be the PS3. We have to get this first game right. We have to get our technology right. So we shelved that project, stated by Evan Walls. High-end back games took on the role afterwards, and they said something. But if we had to do it all over again, we would have done some things differently in the execution of The Lost Frontier. I'm not happy with that being Jack's swan song. I think we could have done a lot better. This was stated by Sam Thompson, senior producer at Sony Interactive Entertainment. Alrighty, as for Daxter's non-canon appearances, he appeared in PlayStation Move Heroes, released in 2011, a game which focused on the features of the PS3's Move controller. Jak and Daxter appear to be escaping from someone. They're trying to kill them. They get sucked into a portal. The same thing happened to Sly, Bentley, and Ratchet & Clank. They all get sucked into a portal. And in short, our heroes are put through the Inter-Universal Hero games to see who's the strongest. They all eventually realize that Lunk and Gleeber, the ones behind all this, recorded their moves in order to steal their places in their worlds. Daxter always wound up being the one discovering their hidden schemes. The big gun he saw turned out to be a teleporter, powered by crystals which were extracted from the planet of the Wibbles. They were all forced to completely mine their planet. In the end, Lunk and Gleeber fail. Daxter somehow manages to persuade the Wibbles to help activate the portal. They all go back home to their respective times, and Daxter ditches the communicator. In PlayStation's All-Stars Battle Royale, released in 2012, Jak and Daxter are looking for a stronger source of eco. They stumble on Ratchet and Clank. Clank calls Dax a weasel. It escalates, and as our duo start to fight other mysterious people, they win the All-Star power, eventually an unrelated source of power. They head back home, and Daxter references Tess, stating that he wishes he goes home back to her. Before we dive a bit more into Daxter's mysterious background and personality, let's quickly bring up a few games in which Daxter was referenced in. Uncharted Drake's Fortune, and the word ottsel on their suit. Wipeout Pure DLC, a ship called the Daxtonator, which looks to be modeled after Daxter. Pain. Daxter is featured as a DLC character. Going Commando. Clank doing Daxter's victory dance from the Precursor Legacy. Not to mention a poster. Sly Cooper Thieves in Time, a treasure called Lutrella nivedansi. The Lutrella nivedansi is a rare hybrid species of the Carnivora family. It is known for its orange fur and loud mouth. Ratchet & Clank 2016 movie while Clank scans Ratchet. Uncharted 3. Daxter was discovered in multiplayer. If you glitch out of the map, you can see Daxter on Bomb. This was uploaded by user Unexpected back in 2012. Next up, the premise of our duo revolved around the idea of a hero, the hero being Jak, and the sidekick Daxter. There was a Making of Jak and Daxter video shared back on February 12, 2012. We had founders Andrew Gavin, Jason Rubin, along with other key folks at the studio. One piece of information I always felt stuck out was Daxter's idea being inspired by Aladdin's Abu. John Kim, animator during that time, mentioned how Daxter's movements, the way he moves around Jak, how that whole thing was inspired from that one character from that movie. As for his personality, he's witty, a wisecracker, loud, friendly, he's a sidekick. But best friend would be a more fitting term. Although Daxter would always make witty remarks, exaggerate stories, brag a lot, always looking to take the spotlight when talking about their adventures, he loves his friend Jak. They have a strong friendship. He's very protective. At a point he does say nobody hurts my friend and lives to brag about it.
From Jak?
You're willing to go down there? Without a fuss this time.
Yeah, well, don't get used to it. It's just that nobody hurts my best friend and lives to brag about it. Let's get him!
Back then, there was a promotional Jak and Daxter trilogy DVD given out by Sony Computer Entertainment America, now known as Sony Interactive Entertainment. The trilogy DVD had two versions, I believe. This one was released before Jak 3. This would be the version from 2004. This featured a 90 minutes recap of games 1, 2, and 3. This was sent out either through a contest on an old Jak X website from what I've read and understood, People would enter their email, and if you were one of the lucky ones, I think there were like a maximum of 1,000 copies. If you were chosen, one would be sent to you. There was also the Jak X pre-orders. If you pre-ordered Jak X, you would get this DVD. As for our narrator on this DVD, we got none other than Daxter himself. And then we got another version, one which contained not only a demo of Jak X and behind the scenes, but also footage of Daxter on PSP. This one, for obvious reason, could only be played on the PS2, due to a demo being present on the disc. Point I'm trying to make here, during the start of Jak 3's recap, Daxter explains how Errol actually turned into a cyborg, half human, half Crimson Bot. Daxter stated he had survived his little eco-explosion on our last adventure, and had been rebuilt by his fellow Crimson Bots into something bigger and better than before. This was never made clear on Jak 3, so this was surely a very cool, interesting piece of information. Underneath all that energy of his, he was always there for his friend, through thick and thin. Daxter, sure, he's the wisecracking orange little ottsel we all adore, but he really is a loyal friend. Trying to save Jak from prison for 2 years, at least it looked like it, he never gave up on the idea. Daxter didn't leave Jak behind in the wastelands, that's another, stating that he's only here because he wouldn't last a second without him. And then Jak took these words right out of his mouth. When he came back after exploring the quote-unquote universe, he told that with all their adventures ahead, he wouldn't last a second without him. I found a couple of archived quotes on the wiki from creative director Danari. When talking about Jak X Combat Racing, he added, "Jak is the hero you want to be. Daxter is the hero you're afraid you are. Daxter is just a little bit concerned, a little bit afraid, and he would rather take the easy way out." He also explained this was all quotes from back in 2004, that Daxter was like a secret weapon. When scenes would get too boring, you'd have Daxter spicing up things with his witty little comments and jokes. Speaking of jokes, one flew over our heads completely. I present to you this scene from Jak 3.
Wanna try to beat me, Score?
Oh, don't worry. Jak beats things all the time. Hey, Jak?
Daxter was certainly the flirty one for sure, always trying to impress the women, get their attention. I mean, we had Kira and TPL, Daxter asking her for a date, stating that rule number 1, she doesn't date animals. Chronologically, Daxter, we had Terran. He was flirting with her as well. She was like, not in the cards, fuzzball. So that was that. There was the bar scene in the end. She did wink at Daxter, but that's pretty much it between these two. Terran was pretty much never to be seen again. As for Jak 2, Daxter recognizes this girl from the underground. She seemed to already be intrigued by Daxter's humor. Then we meet Ashlyn. As per usual, Daxter always tries to grab a woman's attention. Daxter already felt frightened by her. She was pointing a gun at him, so he just already kind of stepped back because she was a bit too intense. Later, back at the bar, Daxter brags about his adventures. Tess is simply amazed by Daxter. Daxter surely didn't mind the physical contact here, him wanting Tess to scratch his back. Oh, not to mention the winner's big kiss. If he's a good boy, maybe he'd receive a kiss later. These things between Tess and Daxter have already crossed the line of simple partnership.
Now, I want you to protect my little baby with this, or else I'll hunt you down and hurt you real bad, okay?
Wow! I didn't know you had so much...
You're such an animal.
Her tone of voice here? You're such an animal? Yep, clearly these two have something going on, more than the typical friendship. If we bring back that scene from the bar in Daxter, it's likely Osmo and his son later came at the bar. You know that scene we had at the end of Jak 2? That's what I'm trying to connect it to. And as stated earlier, Dax and Tess already seem to be fond of one another here. Jak 3. It makes it clear that these two now have an established relationship. Her turning into an ottsel, Daxter wasn't really seen flirting with any other women in this game. Alrighty, moving on. Charles Zumbalus, character concept artist who worked with Naughty Dog back in the day, explained that Daxter was the most admired character at the studio, adding on to the fact that this character was the one with the most amount of different designing and modeling. He also stated that Daxter was a completely original design which he developed without any visual reference. For example, Daxter started off like this. This was shared back in December 2012 as part of Road to Daxter, which contained 6 parts. These were all blog posts. Each part was shared about every 2 weeks. Going back to 2002, Zembellis explained that Daxter won Best Original Character Award at the Game Developers Conference in San Jose, California, deeming it an Oscar in the gaming industry. The event itself I'm talking about. There's so many concepts he shared on his blog from back then. Looking at part 2, he explained that this character had the most amount of work, more than any other game he had worked on. Part 3, we move on to a monkey look. I'm really getting some Agent 9 vibes from Spyro. Zembellis did create a concept for Spyro the Dragon. As for Agent 9, that was actually created by Oliver Wade at Insomnia Games. Part 4, we're getting a bit warmer. The body proportions is getting closer and closer to his final design. After this, the direction on the emerging sidekick started to change. As for part 5, looking at these ones, Zembellis explained that this new direction for the character was making things a bit harder for him. He felt like he was going backwards in terms of design. He still thought that some of these had potential. As for this one, there he is. That's the same exact face we have on the cover of TPL. Last part naturally features Daxter's final concept. This is what the team decided to go with, and I take it instead of that utility belt on him, they went with his goggles hanging on his head. Another cool post shared in October 2013, he talks about human Daxter. His wording I found very interesting. At a point during the game he turns into a human form. These are development sketches of him in that way from the year 2000 when the project was being developed. You might wonder, was this the original idea they had for Daxter? Start off as a furry sidekick and then turn into a human? Looking at the replies, someone corrected Zembellis' statement by redirecting him to the actual scene in the final game, that Daxter started off as a human. He then added, I had little input on the story of Jak and Daxter, other than influencing it by some of the concept sketches I was coming up with. I'm sure they contributed to the narrative that Naughty Dog eventually put together. Next up, one thing that really intrigues me in this series, while perhaps intrigues is not the right word here, this series is known for having either head scratchers or unanswered questions. Since we're talking about Daxter here, he's especially a character that gets me thinking. Daxter is Jak's best friend. Well, thank you, Mr. Captain Obvious. Bear with me here. Jak befriended Daxter in Sandover, which means Daxter originates from Sandover Village, and was originally a human. We have to remember, we have no idea of his background. We don't know who raised him, we don't even know what happened to his parents. At least in Kira's case, it was heavily implied that she was raised by Samos. Kira also happens to originate from Sandover. Heck, same could be said for Kira when it comes to her biological parents. No one knows what happened to them. Jak's biological father, at least, was Damus. Biological mother, yeah, was unknown. But when it comes to Daxter, he or she who raised him is unknown. What we strongly believe in this case, Daxter grew up with Jak and became best friends. As stated in TPL's Design Bible, this was a limited run games collector's edition. It was limited. This was a project between them and Naughty Dog. The ones who lack a common denominator are Jak and Samos. The denominator here being Sandover Village. Jak actually was born in the future. Same for Samos, who was called the Shadow in the Underground. In order to ensure that young Jak and Samos would grow up in Sandover, the gang in Haven City at the end of Jak 2 sent young Samos and Jak to Sandover. Young Samos getting older and of course taking care of young Jak as he grows up. So what happens next? We imagine that Samos eventually gets to raise Kira and Jak. As for Daxter, well, as stated before, we presume that Jak growing up eventually meets Daxter. The only special uniqueness about Daxter is, well, the fact he was blessed with Dark Eco. Dark Eco is an unpredictable phenomenon. Some are affected by it psychologically, Gal and Maya in this case. Well, to be frank, we don't know if Gal and Maya actually fell in a pool of Dark Eco. I'm talking about before we meet them. Of course, in that giant robot, we defeat them and they fall in a pool of Dark Eco. We just know that these two were pretty much corrupted by it. Some turn into monsters, the Dark Makers in this case, actual precursors affected by Dark Eco. Others like Daxter turn into actual Precursor. If the Lost Frontier wants to add anything to the equation, too much Dark Eco turned Daxter into a monster, which he willfully was able to revert back to normal. What I like to believe is Dark Eco, or any of that matter, holds the Precursor's DNA. The leader of the Precursors in Jak 3 did actually point to that fact, stating that all Eco holds their essence, their code, to sort of speak.
Why does Daxter look like?
Ah, yes. All eco contains the source of our essence, our code, so to speak.
When Daxter touched the Dark Eco, he was actually blessed when he thought he was cursed.
Vigor, I take it, was turned into an ottsel by the Precursors, like how Tess got turned into one. This isn't a case of them being blessed. This is more along the lines of be careful what you wish for. Daxter's story is a bit different. Daxter's DNA somehow reacted to the Precursor's DNA and turned him into an ottsel, the creators of Jak's world. When Jak went through the Dark Warrior program, he was the only one who survived. It's possible his contact with Light Eco in Jak 1 while defeating Gall and Maya, that's what created this balance. Enough strength for him to survive the program. His younger self, however, was still pure at heart, opening the Precursor Stone at the end of Jak 2. If, say, Daxter was also pure of heart, being blessed by Dark Eco in this case, that would mean Daxter could potentially have activated the Precursor Stone. But that didn't seem to be the case. After all, even if he turned into an ottsel, he did come into contact with Dark Eco. So looking at Daxter, was this truly just coincidental? Or is there more to Daxter? Did Daxter's DNA allow him to turn into an ottsel? And could this have ties to his family lineage? I will leave that question for you folks. With that being said, this is it for the video. So as usual, thank you so much for your support and thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, if you have your own questions, theories, or anything of such sort, leave it all in the comments section below. And as always, I have been Vivi, and thank you so much for watching. Until next time.